When you were dreaming of being a parent, did you think that once your baby was born, it would be a straight line towards more sleep, better feeding, understanding how to do everything better as a parent? Were you thrown a curveball when you realized that parenthood is not linear, but way more of an up and down line? Some months have more sleep and some have less. And I'm discovering that even 9 years into parenting. Some weeks you feel like nursing is going great, and some weeks you are filled with doubt. Some months you feel like you are connecting with your children and you are killing it as a parent. And some months you can barely make it through a day. Deb shares a story of realizing that breastfeeding, milk supply, and it turns out parenting is not linear. And I'm not surprised that such wisdom comes from a yoga teacher and yoga studio owner. Enjoy this delightful conversation filled with a real-life depiction of postpartum life. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. I may have thought I was prepared, but having known only a handful of people who had ever breastfed and only seeing it up close from a couple of them, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a lactation consultant, and a childbirth educator. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore breastfeeding experiences through the lens of systemic barriers, so that you know your breastfeeding struggles are not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are.
So I'm Deb Flashenberg. I am the founder and director of Prenatal Yoga Center in New York City. And now that we've been online for a couple of years, everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm also...
That's how I met you.
Yeah, I know. I love being online for all these things. I also was previously a labor support doula for about 10 years, and I'm still a certified Lamaze childbirth educator, and I'm studying to be a spinning babies parent educator. And I'm finishing off a course called, it's a long one, it's Prenatal Postnatal Exercise Corrective Specialist with Dr. Sarah Duvall. So I like learning, and I did also a pelvic floor work with Leslie Howard. So I did that teacher training. So I'm a bit of a learning junkie.
Amazing. Yeah, so we'll have all of that linked, and I want to learn more about that towards the end. But I'm here to
Sure.
talk to you about your experiences as a parent.
Yes, I have that too. I have two kids, which are happily at school right now.
Yeah. And I'm so happy to have people on the Milk Making Minutes who are able to look at their experiences as parents through their professional lens, because it's not really possible to separate the two. We can't treat
Mhm.
ourselves as professionals because when you're there in the moment, you're just a parent. But when we
Right.
reflect on those experiences, we can look at them through a different lens. And so it is always interesting to hear the reflections of a person like yourself who has such vast professional experiences reflect on your baby feeding experiences through those lenses, because I think it brings valuable insight to the systemic barriers that exist when it comes to baby feeding in particular.
Yeah, there were ups and downs. The birth itself had ups and downs that I wasn't expecting. And I think that led to, I don't want to say challenges in breastfeeding, because I do feel like when I look at my journey compared to others, it was relatively easy. But the whole thing, like you said, it's not so easy to separate parent from educator. So I had struggled with that during my birth, as well as postpartum. I really thought, because I had such vast experience in the perinatal world, I had been doing this work for almost 10 years before I had my own child. And I was a doula for all that time. And so I was with newborns, and I held newborns, and I supported people learning to breastfeed. So I really thought it would be seamless, and it wasn't. There were some definite learning curves and bumps. In the beginning, I did home births, and there was that panic moment when my midwife and doula left, and my husband like, okay, we just have to keep the child alive for 3 hours until the postpartum doula gets there. And we survived that. And then breastfeeding, it wasn't as natural. And I had told people this. So part of me is like, of course, Deb, this is what you teach. But there was such a difference between telling people and living it that I was always like, our bodies can do this and they're meant to do this. And that doesn't mean that it's going to be a super easy transition into that. And I definitely had some bumps on that way. And learning to get the initial feed and latch and what felt appropriate, that was really unknown. Like I didn't realize how it would be a dance between me and my child to figure out what the correct latch felt like, what position he preferred. And then we finally got the doula helped us the first couple days. And then we're like, okay, I've got this thing. I've got it handled. Okay, I'm okay. And we got into a rhythm and I was breastfeeding on demand and I would be up. One of my favorite memories of the breastfeeding journey is the first few weeks when I would have middle of the night feedings. I would set myself up with all my pillows and everything I thought I was supposed to do. And my husband actually, we picked a couple novels and he read to me. And it was such a beautiful thing in the middle of the night because I was there in bed anyway with all the lights on. So he was up and we went through some novels. I love reading. So it was really a special memory. But about 3 weeks into breastfeeding, there was one night that everything I tried was wrong. I couldn't get the
Mm.
latch right. I couldn't find a position that worked. We took a breastfeeding class and my husband pulled out the notes from the breastfeeding class. And it was like 3 a.m. So I was tired and it was about 3 weeks into this journey. So I was really tired. And I was just in tears, just tears. And I reached out to a friend who's an IBCLC. And several hours later, she was literally at my door helping me. And that
Mm.
was one of those moments that really kind of smacked in the face. It's not linear. Like this whole path of parenthood's not linear. We're going to have our ups and downs. And to not be afraid to call in the help that we couldn't do it on our own. And we really needed someone professional to look. Her name was Andrea Sims Brown. She's amazing. And when she came in, she kind of redid everything. She's like, okay, take this pillow away. Take this pillow away. You need to learn how to do it without the whole cavalry around. She's like, what are you going to do if you're
Yeah.
out and about? You're going to bring your pillows with you?
Yeah, but you needed those pillows for the first few weeks.
I
Oh,
did.
and
I did.
then there was like a recalibration.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that you're mentioning that happened 3 weeks in because often I get phone calls from people who are 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in, 8 weeks in, and they're suddenly at a panic
Panic,
because
total panic.
things were going okay, and then suddenly they can't feed their baby,
Yeah.
or their baby's refusing the breast or the chest for however long. Maybe it's just one night, or maybe it's been 2 nights. And they're in panic mode because they thought things were going okay, and now suddenly they're doubting themselves.
Oh, heavy doubt, very heavy
Yeah.
doubt of I thought I had this. And then luckily I called in someone early enough to give me support and get past that. I never had the doubt that my body could do it. I never had the doubt at that point of like, oh, am I producing enough? That came later. But I just needed someone to reorganize everything. Where I did doubt
Mhm.
was like I thought we figured it out together, like my son and I, but I needed some professional eyes to
Mhm.
notice like, okay, his you're not actually getting the whole nipple in there. And that's why you're having some chafing around. So I just needed someone to kind of judge things up and make sure that we were in it for the long run.
Yeah, yeah, that's so important, and I think some people wonder why. Why do we need so much professional help now? But we're feeding in isolation. We're feeding babies mostly in isolation, and even if you did have postpartum doula support coming in for however many hours it was that person was there, the rest of the time it's just you and your partner, and that's not how humans fed babies for most of human history.
Oh, yeah, and even if I had, like, my mother or mother-in-law nearby, they weren't gonna be of any help. My mother-in-law did bottle feeding, and my mom had no memory of she's like, "I know I breastfed you, but I remember nothing." And I'm like, "Okay, fair enough."
Yeah. So I would love to then back up a little bit because
Sure.
I know that you had 10 years of experience in the perinatal field. But what was your exposure specifically to baby feeding and breastfeeding before it was your turn to be feeding babies? So when I say the word exposure, I mean growing up as a child and then
Oh, yeah.
as you became an adult, seeing people around you feeding babies, your peer group, were you seeing people feeding babies a lot? I know probably in your profession as a
In my
doula, you saw
professional
it.
world, I was, and at my yoga studio, I was. I came from a performing arts background where, and oddly, a lot of my friends had babies later. So I'm what one would call a geriatric mom. I had my first at 37, my second at 40. And that in New York, that's not that unusual. And oddly, my closest friends from childhood also had their kids around the same time. So my friends weren't really, I wasn't seeing them breastfeed. Growing up, I was the youngest, so I didn't see breastfeeding. Um, and then my mom's friends had kids my age, 3 years older and 3 years younger. And I was a child of the 70s, so I don't remember seeing a lot of breastfeeding. It wasn't really until my professional life that at the yoga studio, it is called Prenatal Yoga Center. It's heavily postnatal as well. Like we don't just have your baby and be like, see you. We're fully supporting them. So I opened my studio when I was 28 and I started to see people come back for baby and me and postpartum. And that's when I saw breastfeeding really up close. I saw people, of course, wherever, and it just wasn't really in my periphery. But yeah, I didn't have a ton of exposure growing up. I know that I was breastfed. I also know that I had something called failure to thrive. So at a certain point, my mom was really trying to get as many calories into me. So she must have been, I don't know if it was formula or what, but I do know that I was breastfed. But yeah, I didn't see it. It wasn't part of my upbringing. And it really wasn't something in my life until my late 20s that I saw it. And then when I became a doula, we had to take breastfeeding courses. So that's when I really got more hands on. And even through that, that wasn't my strength. I could support people in early breastfeeding, but then I always referred them out to IBCLCs. I was really in the labor support part and stayed in that as my lane because I just didn't feel super confident going deeper into it until I had
Oh,
my own. And even then, it was still, I still referred out.
yeah. Okay. Very good. And then you had home births.
I did.
And was there anything that happened during the births in looking back that you feel like impacted your breastfeeding either negatively or positively?
Not the only thing I'd say is my first birth was very long. It was about 42 hours.
Mm.
It was a kick in the butt. And I think I came out of that with a lot of exhaustion as well as trauma to my abs and pelvic floor. So I was very conscious of needing to go to physical therapy. So I knew that I needed to pump pretty early to make time for that. There was a moment only a few days after the birth where for whatever reason we didn't have anyone helping, where I had a clogged duct that I kept saying was felt worse than labor. In my mind, I'm like, I knew labor was going to end, but would this clogged duct ever go away? The pain was just so intense. Like at least labor
Mm.
has these flows of contractions and you get a break. The clogged duct just felt like it was getting worse and I was convinced it would never go away. So I do remember comparing that to labor, but I don't think there was anything negative about the births or even positive. It's just the first one left me so exhausted that
Okay.
I knew that I would need to organize pumping so that I could get help.
Okay. Okay. Very good. So you were already after that first birth thinking immediately about pelvic floor
Oh,
therapy
absolutely. Yeah.
and then thinking about, okay, so I'm going to need to start pumping so that I can leave my
Yes.
baby with partner or somebody else
Yes.
so that I can go to these appointments to get
Yeah.
the therapy I needed.
Yeah.
Wow. And so how quickly did you begin pumping to do that?
maybe 2 weeks later.
Wow. Yeah.
And for both kids, I was a bit of an overproducer that for my first especially, we actually borrowed freezer space from one of my friends. It was hilarious because she was a single woman and all that she had in her freezer were, I think Nuva rings must have come in some freezer packet because she had those in her freezer and frozen beer mugs and my breast milk. That was it. So my friend out there, Susan, thanks for letting us use your freezer space. So yeah, I eventually did start pumping and was quite the producer.
Okay. Okay. So you had this early plugged duct, and what did you do to care for that?
Everything, like literally everything. I did heat, I did massage, I got into a shower, I used the breast pump. I, of course, tried the baby. At one point, I had my husband trying to massage. Like it was literally everything we could do. And then I just kept massaging and massaging. It was so, I was afraid it was going to turn into mastitis. So that
Mhm.
was in the back of my mind. I cannot have just gone through this marathon of a birth and now have mastitis. So it was, I think there was slight panic in my mind about that as well. But we eventually, and I of course called Andrea and we eventually got it unclogged, but it was just so painful.
And this was it within days of the
Within
delivery?
Yeah. So my friend who's the lactation consultant, I've been working with her for years. She's the lactation consultant that was at PYC for years. So she was kind of on speed dial. So she didn't come up at that time, but she gave me some advice of what to do. But yeah, it was literally
Mhm.
like 2 or 3 days.
Does this sound amazing to have a lactation consultant on speed dial? Did you know that I text with my clients for weeks after our initial visit? Does it sound comforting to think that you too could have an IBCLC at your fingertips to run questions by instead of consulting Google or the 70,000 member Facebook group? During a 90-minute consult, I will seek to fully understand you and your baby before jumping into solutions. And we will work together to problem solve workable solutions. If this sounds good to you, find my contact info at www.quabbinbirthservices.com. Most likely, I can bill your insurance or at least provide you a super bill so that you can get reimbursement. I can't wait to connect with you, whether you are currently pregnant and would like some prenatal education, or you have just had your baby, or you're 3 weeks in, or 6 weeks in, or 6 months in. See you soon.
So I'd gone through this two-day birth and the hormones were then dropping a few days later. It's like maybe 3 or 4 days because the milk had come in already. So it must have been a few days after that. But it was just so painful.
Are you pregnant or a new parent looking to ensure a better postpartum experience? Or are you a birth worker looking to improve your postpartum care skills? Check out Thriving After Birth, an online self-paced course by me, midwife and educator Tanya Tringali. It's 10 and a half hours of video content featuring experts in lactation, mental health, pelvic floor health, pediatric sleep issues. You also get worksheets and a workbook, as well as options to have a one-on-one session with me. Sign up at motherwitmaternity.com/thriving and let's improve postpartum care together.
Yeah, yeah. And then when your stress hormones are elevating as a result of being worried about the plug duct, that
Yeah.
exacerbates the problem as
Yeah.
well
It was
because it makes it
ugly.
harder to
We got
release
through
the
it,
milk.
but it was ugly.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay. And so I love this image that you paint of anything when it comes to postpartum, but breastfeeding specifically not being linear.
Yeah.
Um, and how you think you have it. You had all the pillows down and you were feeding, and then you get to 3 weeks and you're like, oh, wait, I can't get it. At what point did you realize, okay, I need to call in Andrea? Um,
Literally
and
that night at when I was panicking.
okay.
So she helped, and then she was really a source of support for months after that. When I would be nervous about milk supply dropping, I was calling her and she was again giving me some understanding of what the pattern of breastfeeding. So around 6 months when that was a point where my milk started to change a little bit. I'd gotten my period at that point, and I got really nervous about supply. So we had a conversation about that. And then that was just a stress point for months because I was such an overproducer in the beginning that I she gave me that sense of, you're not always going to have that level of milk production. It is going to ebb and flow. And I needed to hear that because I had been like, but I was producing so much before. So she helped me with that. And then I think around 9 months again, there was a little dip. And she also gave me some perspective because I started to go online and, of course, research everything like what helps milk production. And I was looking at like fenugreek and oats and all these things. And I was drinking like mother's milk tea, and I was trying to add extra pumps. And she did put the brake on. It's okay. Let your body, and when I looked at how much I was producing, I don't remember exactly. She did say, you're fine. You're in the norm of fine. I was just so reflecting back at what I had been. And she's like, it's not going to be the same level the whole time. So she gave me a little bit of grounding because I started to panic a little bit about, am I producing enough?
Yeah, we get these. I don't know if you were on Instagram at the time or if you were mostly on Facebook or what you were going to for your sources of information, but the people who tend to post their photos of their milk production tend to be people who are super producers.
Yeah.
And so when they're showing their photos of their milk, they are people who make lots and lots of milk. It's not the people who are just enoughers typically.
Yeah. It was very anxiety producing.
Yeah, and so then those of us who make just enough for our babies, or maybe not even quite enough if we're not with our babies, think that we are not normal. When in reality, those people who are producing tons and tons of milk are probably outside of the range of average.
Right.
And it's those of us who are making just enough are actually the average.
Yeah. And I remember just needing one thing I did not really appreciate about the whole journey of breastfeeding was the pumping, because I was a working parent. And so I took pumping really seriously, and it was quite a lifestyle cramp in a way. Like, I had to take my pump with me. If I went to teach at night, I would take my pump with me. And often I would hit equinox before I went there. And I was like in the dressing room pumping away. And there's a lot of people like, what is she doing there? Hiding in the corner of the dressing room. So pumping became a lifestyle that I accepted but didn't really love.
Yeah, I love that you say that because most people don't really love pumping.
Yeah.
For a
And
lot of
now
people,
there's
I talk
better
to.
pumps. And so I
Mhm.
was back in the day of using a Medela like pumping style. Now I know there's a kind that you can literally put in your bra and you can be more mobile and more active. But it definitely is a commitment, and cleaning all the parts and schlepping it back and forth to work. I remember with my second, I was actually doing jury duty while pumping. And the first day they're like, there's a bathroom over there. And I don't know where it came from in me. I'm like, no, I deserve a room. And they looked at me, and it's so not like me to cause that kind of problem. But I just have like, no, I deserve a room. And I'm like, and I have a schedule I have to pump on. And so they gave me this unused office, and I was allowed to excuse myself from the jury duty part. And it was the grand jury duty. So it was 2 weeks every day.
Wow.
And so when it was time, I was giving them my schedule. I would excuse myself, go to that room, pump, and then I've got to clean all the parts in the bathroom and then come back and have all the milk and stuff. It was quite a commitment. And those that pump, I have a friend who her baby never latched. And so she was a committed pumper for almost a year. And I have the utmost respect for people that have that as their breastfeeding journey.
However you have managed to feed your baby, both Deb and I have the utmost respect for you. You have juggled so much since becoming a parent. You have looked at the options, listened to healthcare providers, joined groups online, and made the best decisions you could at any given moment. And sometimes, as you hear each week on the Milk Making Minutes, things don't always go as planned, and you have to change course. There are so many systemic and cultural barriers that can get in the way of meeting our original baby feeding goals. No matter how you have fed your baby, how much human milk they have received, you are a conscientious parent who is doing the best you can in any given moment. If you are looking to process why feeding human milk to human babies can be so challenging, find my Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook. This is a place for both parents and professionals to come together and talk about the barriers that make feeding our babies so difficult. I'll see you there.
Even though I was breastfeeding my kids for the most part, even though I was pumping a lot, I remember with my daughter, and I remember when I don't know if I say self-wean because she would start to refuse the breast at a point, but I felt a huge
Mm.
loss of that because I wanted to go longer, and she was literally turning her face away. And I really tried to keep it going. And I knew it was my last child. And it was a slow tapering down between about 12 and a half to 14 months. And I tried to pump more. I tried to do more often. I tried to change positions. I checked what I was eating in my diet. But whatever it was, she kept refusing, and she would drink the breast milk from the bottle, but even that she was starting to refuse. We did realize a couple years later that the nanny we had at the time wasn't giving her the breast milk that I had left. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but she maybe didn't have a taste for it anymore. I don't know, but it was pretty heartbreaking.
Oh, wow. Why wasn't the nanny giving her the breast milk?
I don't know. I never found that out.
Oh,
But
wow.
that was pretty upsetting. But it was a huge emotional loss of wanting that time and knowing that was the last I would have.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when you had these plans to go for your plan was to go for as long as
Yeah, I was hoping for 2 years for both kids. My son, I ended up weaning quite quickly at 18 months because I had a miscarriage at that point, and I just
Mm.
immediately felt like I need my body. Like I just needed space, like a buffer zone. So that
Mhm.
was a pretty quick weaning, and it was really actually quite painful. Even though he wasn't
Mm.
feeding a lot, it was pretty painful. Engorged. The whole cabbage leaves actually worked. So I
Mhm.
put the cabbage leaves in the bra. That really actually worked. But yeah, for both kids, I was hoping as long as at least 2 years, but that didn't.
Yeah, so with your son, you had this traumatic experience, and so then I can imagine wanting a do-over with your daughter.
Yeah, I really wanted to go as long as possible, but she had other plans.
Yeah. Was she one of those kids who was really distractible while nursing, always wanting
Oddly,
to see what was going
no.
on?
No, my son definitely was, but my daughter wasn't. She was pretty relaxed in the whole experience.
Yeah, and so she had that quick weaning, and then how did you deal with the grief of realizing that it was over?
I tried to keep pumping, so thinking, okay, if she's not going to take the breast, because I really wanted her to, really believe in the power of breast milk, so I really wanted her to have that, and so I tried to keep that up for another couple months or maybe 6 weeks, and then my supply just really started to dwindle. So I let it go and just had to come to peace with it and tell myself that I did the best I could with her, and I gave everything everything I could, and I took all the efforts. And even in hindsight, I'm like, oh, maybe if I tried a different pump or if I tried another method. It's years later and I still wonder what I could have done differently.
I know, it's so easy for us to look back and wish that things had gone a different way, and we continue to do that as mothers, don't we?
Yes.
Whether it's birth or breastfeeding or wishing we had made different decisions or disciplinary decisions, or it just keeps going. And I don't know about you, but I don't find my husband doubting himself as much as I doubt myself.
Yeah, actually you're very you're quite spot on about that. Yeah.
I don't know what it is about, about motherhood in particular.
I agree.
But breastfeeding, it's one of these places we have all of these systemic barriers that make it so difficult. And then we begin to blame ourselves when things don't go like we had hoped.
Yeah, I think that a lot of like you said, it's not just breastfeeding. It can be like you said, disciplinary birth choices, how the birth unfolded, early parenthood, there is so much that's really out of our control, and coming like surrendering to that, coming to grips with that, and then letting it pass. And I have to remind myself I did the best I could in that situation at that time. And of course hindsight's 2020. I'm like, oh, if I'd only done this. But early parenthood and birth and pregnancy, it is, while it's for many, not everyone, a time of great excitement and enjoyment, it's also a huge transition, and our hormones are fluctuating all over the place, and expectations of what we think this period should be like. It's hard to get a clear sense. And again, we're always just doing the best we can with the information we have at that moment, at that time.
Yeah. And when your daughter is 14 months, there's no making a 14-month-old nurse.
I tried.
Nothing.
I can tell you, I tried.
There's nothing you can do about that. They have their own minds.
And she still does, but yeah.
Yeah, I say that all the time about my son, he'll be 9 next month in December. And there's so much when I look back about his babyhood that I stressed about when it comes to sleep and just his disposition. And I can see it today in him as a 9-year-old. And I wish that I could have just relaxed into who he was showing me he was as a
Yes.
baby,
Yes.
because that was just his personality. But instead, I was trying to fix him and change him to what society was telling me he should be, instead of learning who my baby was.
Right. I think that happens a lot. And I very much pause and try to look at that with my own kids. My son has ADHD, and my husband and I, we can't look at societal norms. We have to look and accept that his brain works a little bit differently, and that's okay. And we're going to all function better when we accept what he can and can't do, and then support his strengths and support his weaknesses and help him through that instead of fighting it. So I didn't quite learn that lesson with my 14-month daughter at that time, but I think I'm learning it now.
I know. And I think it's important to talk about these things when it comes to babies and breastfeeding, because it's a through line. I really think that when we are parents of our young babies and we're trying to make baby feeding decisions, that's when the doubt starts to set in about our worth as parents. Because we go to a pediatrician, often we hear a nurse will say, "Oh, the latch looks fine." And we feel like the latch is not good. But this person told us the latch looks fine. And we doubt our own intuition
Right.
about this relationship with our baby. But we know our bodies and we know our babies. And I always like to encourage people when I work with them, I like to say, you're the expert of your baby and your body. And I am the expert when it comes to the physiology of milk supply and hormones. And let's put our brains together to try to take our expertise and work together to try to come to some solutions when it comes to feeding your baby, because I need your expertise and you need my expertise. But I'm not the expert on your baby. You are.
And I love what you said about the instincts, because I feel like that's something that we don't honor as much and support, because it's so easy to not. It's so easy to, instead of taking a moment and sitting with that perhaps emotional discomfort of what are my instincts saying, it's much easier to be like, let me go online and look for the answer. And then we get a
Right.
thousand different answers, and
Right.
where it might have been more successful or more beneficial to sit and be like, okay, what am I really feeling? What's my body telling me? What's my heart telling me? And let that instinct come that way. And then maybe you can reach out and be like, okay, professional, here's what I'm feeling. Here's what I'm experiencing. Here's what I'm thinking. How does that, how does that align with what the facts and science say? I don't think
Yeah,
we trust our
exactly.
instincts enough.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings me back around to a question I had. I have talked to other people who were professionals before they were parents themselves, and they have talked about this idea of having performance anxiety once they became
Oh,
parents.
totally.
So I would love to
100%.
hear your take on that, because you had this thriving business for, what did you say, 10 years
Yeah.
before it was your turn?
I felt that immediately, not just in parenthood, but I felt that throughout my pregnancy. Because here's leading a whole studio, the Prenatal Yoga Center, and they saw me, and I actually purposely didn't take classes at my own space because
Mm.
when I did, people would look at me and I want to be like, I'm
Mm.
just trying to be a pregnant person on my mat, doing my practice. Don't look at me. So I started by trying to hide in the back corner, but then people would still look at me. And then the teachers always knew I was there and I was their boss. And so I learned pretty early, Deb, go take class elsewhere. And
Yeah.
then so I did that. So I felt that. And during my birth, I remember my doula talking to my husband. I was told this later when we were talking about me transferring because it was such a long birth.
Mm.
And I remember hearing, what was it brought back to me like, oh, it would be a lot. It would be a lot for Deb to have to transfer. Like, I think they were worried about how it would make me feel that I had to transfer, which in hindsight, I'm like, I probably should have transferred, but that's another story. And then
Yeah.
in early parenthood, I joined the new mom support group at my studio. And I also felt a little bit of, oh, she's been doing this for so long. How's it going? And I felt at times almost like I didn't have permission to be the hot mess that I felt like, that they were
Yeah.
expecting me to cruise through it and be like, look, I'm all great, when that was not the case. So I gave
Mm.
myself the permission, especially in the support group, of just being really honest with myself and my community members because I needed support. I didn't need at that time to be the face of the community. I needed to be in the community and I needed the support that I knew was available, that I saw and I built. I needed to step down from my position in a sense and just be like, hey guys, I'm just like you. My boobs are leaky. I'm tired. Nothing fits. Like, I needed just to find that same acceptance and community. But I absolutely felt along the way from the beginning to the end that performance anxiety and that expectation from the community for me to show up in a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine that that would definitely be there.
Yeah, it's important to that's when you have to call in the rest of the other help. Be like, you
Right.
tell me, because it's so charged. There's just so much behind it. That's why I think having a doula, for example, is so different than maybe having a parent or a friend or a sister or someone, because they're emotionally involved, everyone else.
Right.
And the doula can come in not emotionally involved. And when you're the parent, even if you're the expert, there's so much behind that decision making, and there can be self-doubt. Like, you want to have the other person give you some support and be like, what do you go back to instincts, what are your instincts telling you, but then let's match it again with what I, the expert, can bring to the table.
Exactly.
Yes,
So it's really important to get that support even if you are a professional. Get that support from the outside. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you are a human being
absolutely.
in that moment. Yeah. So you were at 14 18 months with your first and
Mhm.
14 months with your second.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the in-person support group early on with your first. Did you attend any other in-person support groups?
Not I feel so badly. There's so much I did with my first that I did not do with my second. And the interesting thing was the support group that I met with my son, we all, or not all, there's I think 12 of us in that support group. About 4 of us became friends for a long period of time, and we all had our seconds within weeks of each other.
Wow.
So I know it was actually, and we all in New York City, we were kind of living on top of each other. So we were also within blocks of each other. So we formed our own we stayed together and we were our own support group because we're still going through that transition of bringing baby number 2 into the whole mix. So it was just like, it was support group 2.0 because it was the same people. So while we didn't have a facilitator in the way that we did the first time, we still supported each other.
Yeah. And how do you think that impacted your postpartum experience with your second?
I think I had more confidence the second time because it just didn't feel as scary. And I just having the other people around me that were also going through it was really important. It was huge. And it also got me out of the house a little bit easier because I could go to someone's house and I knew the first one was able to play with the others. And so it was a really nice community at that time.
Are you still friends with those people?
I'm still friends, but interestingly, we've all now left. So my studio is still in New York City, but I live in New Jersey now. So we've all dispersed, but we still keep in touch. But
Okay.
there was something really magical about being 3 blocks from my really good friend Maria. And our girls are literally, I think, 3 or 4 weeks apart. And our boys are like 6 days apart. And
Wow.
it was just amazing being like, okay, I'm coming over, and just like getting the kids out of the house at that time. And our friend Ingrid was a couple of blocks further down, and we could all just fall. And Maria had a really big apartment. So we would all just fall into her place. And it was
Yeah.
just really, it was important. It was really important support at that time.
Yeah. Are you noticing a change in the types of supports people receive postpartum, post COVID?
Yeah, so especially at my studio in the first 2 years, maybe year and a half, 2 years, we kept all the support online, especially for new babies, postpartum folks. So I think there was a difference because what was amazing is that our prenatal classes went online very quickly. So our community was everywhere, and that allowed our postpartum to be everywhere. But I do think something about having a hard day and just needing to be face to face with another parent, I think that changed. I think it's coming back, and I'm seeing that in the studio now. So we started our in-person classes about a year ago. And what are we in November? More than a year ago. I feel like time is a little mushy. I do see there is something about just showing up and letting the kids play and just communicating face to face. So I do think there was a shift, and I think it's slowly coming back. But at the same time, it's great that we open the doors that we could support each other beyond our walls. Like my friend Maria is now in Chicago, so I can still chat with her, but it's not the same as just throwing the kids in a stroller and just showing up.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
there is an ebb and flow, and I think that there is a change. And I'm curious to see as we continue with this online community that many people have created and are in person, to see how that walks side by side.
Yeah. I'd be interested to see research in rates of postpartum depression and
Oh,
anxiety.
that I have heard. So I've actually spoken to some therapists about this. And in New York City, we have something called the Motherhood Center. So Paige Bellenbaum is in charge of that. And I don't think she's the main director, but she's quite high up there. And she and I have communicated that the rates of reported postpartum depression throughout the pandemic were much higher, and anxiety were much higher than we saw pre-pandemic. I would assume a lot of that has to do with isolation.
That was my feeling. And then because people are so used to isolation, I'm wondering if they are going to
Come out of it.
seek out the in-person support that is so essential to
I
postpartum
think
health.
so. Just in terms of looking at the data we have for like our classes, for example, we have people really wanting to come in person and connect with each other and just see another face. So I think it's going to swing back, but there has been data about higher levels of postpartum depression and anxiety throughout the pandemic. But I'll be curious to see how that tapers and shifts as we continue forward.
Yeah. Okay. So you've talked a little bit about your in-person support. Do you offer online support still
It should
to
start in
folks?
January. So right around hopefully when this is coming out, we will have it in online in January. All of our support's led by a licensed social worker, a licensed clinical social worker. So it's someone that has experience in the perinatal world that can really help guide conversations and offer insight. She's the person that does it online. Jess Shapley's remarkable. I think of her and I smile because she just makes me happy. She was the person I worked with when I was in my new mom support group. She's been at the studio for 20 years. And you know, those people that you meet that you're just like, I like hanging out with you. You just make me smile. That is Jess.
Mm.
So I have very warm thoughts towards her.
Oh, amazing. Okay. And then you can be found online on Instagram. You give
Oh yeah.
amazing,
Thank you.
um, yeah, you just give amazing tips for people who are pregnant and people in the postpartum period as well.
Definitely. Yeah. It's a full circle there. Yeah, so we can be found at Prenatal Yoga Center. We on Facebook, on Instagram. That's our website. I started the studio 20 years ago, so it wasn't the most original name, but it gets straight to the point. So everything's on Prenatal Yoga Center.
Yeah. And then you also have a podcast.
I do, which you are on. I think your episode comes out in a few weeks. It is called Yoga
Great.
Birth Babies.
Awesome. So I'll have all of that linked in the show notes, including my episode where we discussed disability.
Yes, there's disability. It was a really wonderful conversation. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it was great. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your personal stories. I love this idea how breastfeeding is not linear. And at any point when a person feels like breastfeeding is not going well, they can reach out to somebody, because you might feel like it starts out okay, and it might be 3 weeks in, it might be 8 weeks in, it might be 6 months in. You might need support. And it's okay to reach out for that support at any time to get reassurance. And it's really important to reach out to somebody who is going to help you tap into your own intuition.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for sharing your own stories.
Thank you so much for having me.
Deb's story is one that shows us that even someone fully immersed in providing prenatal and postnatal support needs support once it is their turn. Deb sought out that support in a variety of ways. She knew during pregnancy that she couldn't attend her own prenatal yoga studio because she felt watched, so she found somewhere else to go, and that she couldn't put on a show while attending the new parent support group, and that she had to be real there. She also knew when it was time to call in professional support from an IBCLC, even though up until that point, she felt like feeding had been going well. She also knew when it was time to seek out friends, even if it was just to get out of the house. If you are feeling lonely in the postpartum period and this time is not living up to your expectations, I encourage you to seek out support. Joining support groups online is a great first step. The Prenatal Yoga Center is linked in the show notes, and you can start there. The Milkmaking Minutes community group on Facebook is a small but lovely community, and everyone there will get whatever issue it is that you're having, and even if they don't get it personally, they will provide empathy. Postpartum Support International has groups. La Leche League International and Breastfeeding USA both have in-person and online virtual groups that are local to you. Whatever you do, know that I am cheering you on, and I am so glad that you come here each week to listen to somebody else share their story of how they fed their baby. And if you would like to hear my story of how I was impacted by disability during my birth that I shared on Deb's podcast called Yoga Birth Babies, I definitely have that linked in the show notes. So be sure to go to her podcast and take a listen. Bye. Jolie, when you're older, do you want to have a baby?
Yes.
And when you have a baby, do you think you will feel lonely sometimes when you're at home with the baby?
Well, I have the person I'm married to.
Yeah, you'll have the person you're married to. Do you think you will want to make friends with other people that have babies?
Of course.
And where do you think you'll make friends with other people who have babies?
At the playground.
That's a great place to meet other families. Thank you.